What is up, guys? Welcome to episode 3 of T2T Dynasty Live. Today, we're going to be talking about our guys, the people at each position that we're looking to get on our squads. These are the guys that we feel very strongly about. We're going to focus on some of the lower ranked people. Everybody wants Bijan and Jamar Chase on their teams. We're not going to talk about them. We're going to try to keep it a little more interesting than that. My name is Dylan Carlson. You guys know me as Wicked. You can find me on Twitter at Wicked_Dynasty. Over here on my right is Mike. You can find him on Twitter at DynastyDogMike. And then down below me, I got AJ at AJ_FFBall. Mike, how you doing today?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Oh, just busy, man. Busy. I appreciate you guys rescheduling for me. I had a late day at work yesterday and then hit a little bit of traffic today. So I appreciate you guys being flexible for the show. You got anything going on this week, Mike?
Not so much. I was just a guest on Under the Helmet podcast yesterday or on Tuesday, so that should be coming out soon. So that was a very fun time, interesting time. A lot of trade questions that I had to get prepared for. So nice. Yeah, just be on the lookout for that.
Right on, man. Hey, I'm digging the sweatshirt.
Yeah. Thank you. There's only 2 in existence right now. I own one of them, so eventually maybe I'll start putting out more. But I really like it. I just enjoy it.
Yeah, it looks good. How you doing this week, AJ?
Good. Can't complain.
You working on anything over there?
Not really. I'm going through this PFF training program thing. I don't know if I mentioned that on air last week, but yeah, I could just still going through that. It takes up quite a bit of time, but it's been fun and interesting.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I hope that works out for you. PFF is a great resource, and I know a lot of us in the fantasy community use it. So, yeah, I hope that you get through all that. And what are you going to be doing for them?
Like data collection. So, like watching the games,
film,
charting information.
Nice.
Yeah,
stuff you do anyway.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, so just a couple of news items that I wanted to hit on before we get started. And mostly it's just people getting paid, man.
Mostly wide receivers, too.
Yeah, wide receivers are getting the bag this week. We got Nico Collins and Jalen Waddle that got some good money with some good guarantee from their respective teams. Do you believe, Mike, that either of those deals should influence dynasty value of either of those players?
Probably not. I think both of those guys are pretty cemented in where they are in dynasty rankings right now. So I don't think this will move or drop any of these guys or move or drop anybody else. I think it's pretty lockstep right now.
What do you think, AJ?
Waddle, definitely, I don't think this will change anything. I think this was kind of a foregone conclusion with him. With Collins, I do think there were a lot of people out there who still were kind of skeptical of him just because he's really only had one really productive year in 3 seasons. I think for those people, this might have kind of cemented him as a
I agree.
High-end dynasty asset, which I think he already should have been looked at that way. But now I think everybody is probably in agreement with it.
I do think the community as a whole has been higher on Nico Collins more recently. So that's why I didn't think like he would move that much, in my opinion. Now, I do have a question for you guys since the 3 got paid. Devontae, Waddle, or Nico, who do you have ranked higher?
In Dynasty, I have Waddle, the highest of those. Waddle, Nico, and Devontae.
I'm pretty sure I have Waddle as well. But I could certainly see Nico making a push this year. Mm-hmm. He's got the quarterback. And as much as we all like Waddle, I don't know that he has the consistent production to match where his value has been. Whereas with Nico, I think that for some reason, he just hasn't developed that name value yet. And so a lot of people are still a little behind on him. But I think him getting this contract extension is really going to help kind of push him to where he probably should have been for a while now.
Have you seen Nico's reception perception that just dropped a few days ago? It
Yeah.
is that of a superstar.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. That was really about it. Anything that I missed out on that you guys have noticed this week? I know OTAs have started. Everybody's in the best shape of their life. I saw a clip on Twitter of Aaron Rodgers rubbing his ankle today.
People freaking
Everybody's
out about
freaking
that.
out about that. I mean, there's nothing really newsworthy. I don't think. Everything we hear from coaches and players for the next 2-3 months is all BS for the most part.
To be honest, though, it's fun. It is fun, though.
Yeah, it's fun to speculate and kind of jump into the conversation, but I don't think anything has been happening that we really need to worry about or that should influence any decision making.
Javon Baker's been crushing it, though. Javon Baker has been crushing it.
See the picture of his thighs today?
Yeah.
On Twitter? Woo.
Yeah. Wow. Did you hear about Jacoby Brissett was hyping him up? He said I forget exactly the quote. I can look it up. But he was very impressed with Javon Baker. So that's what you want to hear from a guy who's been in the league as long as and has traveled as Jacoby Brissett. He says Javon Baker has gotten better every day, noting his 2 impressive grabs during team drills. It was basically like he said something that's what you want to see from a guy. So I was going to put him in my guys, but I decided to leave that one alone this time.
Yeah, so for some of those like fringe rookie players that maybe you drafted in the 3rd round and stuff like that, OTAs and training camp is a good time for you to monitor their progress. You know, don't believe all the hype and this dude's amazing, is the best thing ever. Like, don't buy into all that. But what you do want to see is steady drumbeat of this guy's performing really well in practice every day. That kind of stuff. You do want to pay attention to because coaches are paying attention to that. If they've got a guy that is consistently showing up and putting in work and practice every day and doing well, that tends to lead to more opportunity for some of those down roster guys, those later draft picks, to get onto the field and kind of carve out a role for themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if you got the one that made me laugh the hardest was I don't know who tweeted it. It was a well-known account too. I don't know who it was, but it was routes against air. It was Trevor Lawrence throwing a deep ball to Brian Thomas Jr. and he goes threading the needle. I was like, there was nobody there.
Yeah. We're just all hungry for some football action, man. We'll take what we can get.
I love it.
So the only league that we're filling right now is the 384 team redraft tournament that's going to be kicking off in August, right before the season starts. That's going to be 32 leagues, 32 12-team leagues, so 384 teams total. It's a $15 buy-in with a $4,000 first prize. You will compete weeks 1 through 12 to be the highest scoring team of your league, and then weeks 13 through 17, the top scorers from each league will compete in a single elimination tournament, with the winner taking home $4,000. So if you're interested in getting in on that, you can hit me up on Twitter at Wicked_Dynasty, or you can jump into our Gilded and just tag me in there, and I will get you set up. So before we get started here, guys, I just want to give a quick shout out to our Patreon, and then we will begin with our My Guy wide receivers.
Are you ready to take over your fantasy leagues and become a champion? Get the edge you need and join the Toilets to Titles Patreon today to get exclusive access to our T2T staff, weekly waiver wire shows, and Patreon exclusive leagues like our signature Frankenstank League. Members enjoy other amazing benefits such as monthly giveaways featuring autographed jerseys, collectibles, Yeti coolers, and more. Sign up now for as little as $9.99 per month and dominate your fantasy leagues like never before. Visit patreon.com/toilets to titles and let us help take your teams to the championship this season.
All right, guys, let's jump right into this. Mike, give me your wide receiver that you want on every roster, the guy that you're going to aggressively pursue and that you are going to defend against all comers.
All right, so if I were to tell you guys that there is a 23-year-old wide receiver who had 1,100 yards receiving last year that you could get for any pretty much any random 2025 first, would you be interested? A guy, by the way, who is probably one of the most disrespected wide receivers in football. Would you guys take a swing on a 23-year-old wide receiver who is ascending? Yes or no?
Probably.
Well, that answer is George Pickens. Why is he so cheap? He is the wide receiver 1 on the Pittsburgh Steelers by a wide margin. I think that's fair to say, correct? He is getting a boost at quarterback in Russell Wilson. Now, saying Russell Wilson is a boost at quarterback is kind of hard to say out loud, but anything really is better than Kenny Pickett, who's never thrown a 300-yard game. And if you notice, if you go back, some of Kenny's best performances last year is when George Pickens balled out, right? And let's go back to Russell Wilson last year. Russell Wilson had Cortland Sutton looking pretty damn good. Cortland Sutton had 10 of his 24 touchdowns in his career last year. I could see George Pickens having like 12 and having over 1,000 yards receiving. So I could see a top 15 fantasy point season for George Pickens this year. And I put my hot take out a little bit ago that I believe that he will score more fantasy points this season than Chris Olave.
That's spicy.
That is
How is that spicy, though? How is that spicy? Chris Olave might be one of the most overrated wide receivers in football right now.
So I'm lower on Chris Olave than consensus. I think he is a little overrated, and I don't think he's got a good enough quarterback to really break into that next tier. But he can separate a lot better than George Pickens can.
Well, let's be honest, because I've seen that, and I agree with you. He is a better route runner than George Pickens. But from year 1 to year 2, George Pickens looked a lot better as a separator and as a route runner, to me anyway. It looked like he's improving, and that's what you want to see from a second-year wideout.
Yeah. What do you think,
especially with all the tools.
Pickens definitely, I think, was a more well-rounded player this year than he was in year 1. Olave, I really like Olave. I get the detractors just because it hasn't really quite shown up in fantasy production yet, just because he hasn't been scoring touchdowns. And that offense is just not very good. But Pickens, I get it. I think it's almost like a stylistic thing. It's just like not the type of receiver that I tend to gravitate towards, is part of why I stay away from him. But no, everything you say makes perfect sense and is very, very valid.
Yeah, for me,
I think he's probably worth a buy at cost.
Especially for a random 2025 first, where if you're a competing team and you're throwing that out there and somebody accepts it, absolutely smash that.
Yeah, I think he's a really good candidate to see his value rise a ton over this season. But again, just for me personally, he's not the wide receiver I'd want to plant my flag on. I like my guys to be a little shiftier in their routes. I think that his lack of separation makes him a little bit easier to shut down as far as a fantasy perspective goes. I think he'll have some bust weeks just because he's not going to get consistently good targets because he's just not open enough.
Now,
what's that?
If you're in a best ball league,
in best ball, absolutely,
much more attractive option. He's going to have some huge games.
I will say that a lot of his routes last year were very one-dimensional, and I don't think it helped. Especially, we noticed him start to step up more when Matt Canada was gone, and when Kenny Pickett was gone, and they had who was the other quarterback? I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
For the Steelers?
Yeah, for the Steelers.
What's his face?
I kept wanting to say Duck Hodges, and I know that's not right.
Looking at his face in my head.
So am I. Oh, Mason Rudolph, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So the thing with George Pickens is you just need to get him involved. And that's one of the issues I think the Steelers have had the past 2 years with him. And he's shown improvement the past 2 years. So if they can get that figured out, I'm ready. I'm ready for it.
He's definitely going to have the opportunity because they are going to absolutely need him to function.
Yeah.
All right, AJ, who is your wide receiver that you can't live without?
So for me, it is Jaden Reed.
Okay.
I think he is somebody who's being bumped down a little bit because of how crowded that Green Bay receiver room is. But the way I see it, he is very much a cut above the rest of those guys. I think I wouldn't be surprised if any of Dobbs, Watson, or Wicks ended up as like number 2 in targets on the team. I would be pretty surprised if number 1 was anybody but Jaden Reed. Just last year as a rookie, he was, of all receivers with 300 who ran at least 300 routes, he was 20th in targets per route run. And a couple of guys he was ahead of last year in targets per route run are Tank Dell, Brandon Ayuk, Drake London, and DJ Moore. The guys who he was targeted more often than on a per route basis, all very good receivers. I think he also gets some usage in like in the running game a little bit with those like jet sweeps and the, not to the same extent that Debo does, but similar types of plays. He'll get rushing touchdowns. You know, he'll have weeks where he has like 30, 40 rushing yards, which is a pretty big boost every now and again. And I just think he's just a really talented, well-rounded player who can play all 3 receiver positions. And in a crowded room like he has in Green Bay, that's really important because like no matter what combination you have out there, he'll always have a place to be on the field. And yeah, I think like looking at ADP right now, to me, like according to this, he's wide receiver 34 on ADP and like 9 spots behind Jordan Addison. I would take Jaden Reed way before I would take Jordan Addison personally. He's getting drafted behind guys like Mike Evans and Devontae Adams, who are older. Like I would take Jaden Reed in a heartbeat over those guys. I think he probably won't be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, like particularly often, but I see him being a wide receiver 2 for many years.
Yeah, I really like Jaden Reed myself. That we always say that we want pieces of good offenses, right? And I think that we can agree that Green Bay has a pretty good offense, and they have a pretty good offense that has a high likelihood of getting a lot better over the next couple of years because it's so young. And I think that Jaden Reed is going to be the most consistent performer out of that group of pass catchers just because of the role that he serves. There's a lot of mouths to feed, and so that does cap everybody on their potential fantasy production. But on a week-to-week basis, I think that Jaden Reed is going to offer you the steadiest production. And in fantasy, that's a really valuable asset to have. If you got a guy that you just kind of don't have to worry about every week, it's very, very good for your mental health.
For sure.
All right, so my guy that I am pounding the table for and that I am tired of people undervaluing is Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is an elite separator. Go check. I reference reception perception a lot. AJ, I know you like reception perception too. Matt Harmon does a great job with his write-ups, and he's very consistent across the board. And go check out Deontay Johnson's reception perception chart. It is phenomenal. The dude can get open, and he can get open at every level of the field. He can run a full route tree. And now he's going to Carolina, and a lot of people are poo-pooing that, and I understand because they were pretty bad last year. Bryce Young did not look great. But I think that Deontay Johnson is exactly the type of receiver that Bryce Young is going to fall in love with because the dude gets open. He's going to give him a nice, easy target to throw to. And so every time that Bryce needs a play, he's going to be looking at Deontay because he's going to have faith that he's going to get that extra step on a DB because he has proven that he can be capable of that on a consistent basis. He's only 27 years old, so it's not like he's a 32-year-old receiver. He's still got a lot of gas in the tank. I think if Deontay had better touchdown production the past couple of years, he would be much higher as far as ADP and value goes. I think he got a little unlucky in that regard in some situations. And I firmly believe that touchdown regression is real, whether it be positive or negative. So if you've got a guy that's been, real close to scoring a bunch of touchdowns for a couple of years, it usually will come back and he'll have a big season with touchdowns eventually and kind of bring that average back to the mean. He's the type of under the radar fantasy add to your team that can really propel you to a championship, because he's the type of guy that nobody's going to charge you an arm and a leg for. A lot of times you can even get him as a throw in on top of a bigger deal. He's not a name that people get excited about, so he's easy to go and acquire. And the return that you're going to get on whatever you have to trade for him, I guarantee you, is going to be worth it.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I'm a Steelers fan, so I've watched plenty of Deontay Johnson over the years. He gets a lot of hate from some people. He has his flaws as a player, but I mean, man, like you said, and just making plays in tight coverage, and I think that probably contributes to the lack of touchdowns. But I mean, he just gets open, and I think he fits so well with what Bryce Young does, which is just getting the ball out quick, on time. And when you're getting the ball out on time to somebody like Deontay Johnson, you alleviate, because he's going to get separation, you alleviate the need for him to make plays in tight coverage. So I think it's a really good match. And 100-year-old Adam Thielen caught 100 passes last year.
Right.
I don't see why Deontay wouldn't do similar things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that they brought in basically a younger version of Adam Thielen, going to basically ask him to do the same kind of things. This is a really good signing for them, and it's a really good pick by you. I'm interested to see how he does.
Yeah, I think similar to George Pickens, Deontay could see his value really skyrocket throughout the season. And so I think that this is a great opportunity, because even let's say I'm wrong. I mean, what did you give up for Deontay Johnson?
Probably a second.
A second, maybe a future second. Like, oh well, it's worth the potential upside. In my opinion, even the worst case scenario is worth the risk in this situation.
Yeah, especially if you're like just coming out of a rebuild and just being like, okay, this is my year where I'm going to compete. You might still have some extra seconds, extra thirds from the rebuild, and just send one of those off for Deontay Johnson. That's a great way to boost your lineup.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will get into our running backs.
Looking for a place to connect with fellow fantasy football fanatics? Well, look no further than our Gilded server. Join the Title Tribe, where you can chat, strategize, and debate about all things football. Whether you're swapping lineup advice, discussing the latest trades, or fearlessly defending your favorite player, our Gilded server is the perfect spot to hang out with like-minded fans. Our Gilded server is free to join, and the link can be found in the video description or on our website at toiletstotitles.com. We look forward to seeing you in the tribe.
All right, guys, if you're not in our Gilded, you need to get in there, because it's a great spot for you.
The answer to this question is yes, by the way. Zay Flowers doesn't get enough Dynasty love, to be honest with you, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, Zay Flowers is amazing, but I feel like Zay Flowers gets a lot of hype. I feel like people love Zay Flowers. I feel like Zay Flowers is already developing that name value.
Okay, I didn't notice that.
He's attached to a good quarterback.
I see him as being very similar to Jaden Reed as a player, and I think the gap between them is way too wide. I think Zay Flowers is priced appropriately, and he's an awesome player. But I don't, because I mean, who are some of the guys if you go up even just a few spots in ADP, you get to like Devontae Smith and like those kind of guys, and it's kind of tough to.
That is kind of high.
Yeah,
awesome
though.
To me, I think he might be one of the safest wide receivers, just on the aspect he's probably going to be a wide receiver too, perennially, because of the way he can get open, points per reception, king probably. So that I do like Zay Flowers. I don't think he gets enough love. Maybe I'm just not paying attention too much.
Yeah, I mean,
depends.
Zay Flowers. Go ahead, AJ.
Oh no.
So Zay Flowers, I think, is a great asset, because he's going to have a very safe floor, because there's not a ton of competition on that team. for targets, and he's going to still provide you with those smash week upside. He's probably not a guy that's going to be an elite. He might break into a wide receiver one season at some point if he has a big year, but that's not going to be the standard for him or the expectation. But he is going to give you those weeks where he just absolutely crushes, and he has that game-winning upside for your squad while still providing you with a safe floor.
Agreed.
All right, let's talk about some running backs. AJ, you got Kendre Miller. I think that's a really smart choice. What do you got to say about it?
Yeah, I think I'm honestly, like, for the last couple of weeks when we've been doing some of these dynasty startups, I haven't managed to get him in them because I've looked at how low his ADP is, and I'm like, oh, I can wait. Like, and then he's been getting taken way above ADP, which I think is smart. I think he is the most mispriced player in all of Dynasty. Looking at this Dynasty Data Lab ADP, he goes in Dynasty after Austin Eckler, who I don't even think is going to start this year and is like 30.
Probably not.
Kendre Miller is still 21 years old. He's a good pass catcher. Alvin Kamara is still a decent fantasy asset, but I don't think anybody thinks he's like a great runner at this point in his career. He's probably just like, I wouldn't be surprised if halfway through the year we see a 50-50 split with him and Kendre Miller, with Miller getting most of the groundwork.
Yeah, that team's going to be bad too, so that helps.
Yeah. And then when Kamara does move on, like, Kendre Miller has the profile of being a legitimate 3-down workhorse. He's a good pass catcher. Last year, small sample size, but of all running backs who ran at least 50 routes, he had the highest yards per route run. Granted, he had like 11 catches, but still. He was a great prospect with good draft capital. I would say the only concern that I have with him is if the Saints are really bad, and I think coach is probably already on the hot seat. If a new coach comes in, that would be the one concern I would have. Just, a young, fairly unproven player, they can tend to get kind of pushed to the side a little bit when a new regime comes in. But other than that, I could see him. He's one of my favorite picks in best ball right now too. Like, by the end of the year, I think he could be getting like legitimate volume. I'm not worried about Jamal Williams taking touches away. I honestly don't know what I'm missing with him, why his ADP is so low. I just think he's a really good player.
I think running back is one of those positions where if you don't produce right away, people forget about you and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that Kendre is feeling a little bit of that right now, because I personally think that the talent is definitely there. Kamara is ancient at this point for a running back. Who knows if he'll even be on the team after June 1st, because they can save a ton of money by cutting him.
And they are in cap hell too.
Yeah.
They've been in cap hell for the past 10 years. They do this it's wild what they do.
Yeah. I totally think that Kendre could take over that backfield this year and just smash.
Yeah, he absolutely could. The other biggest thing about him is health. We can't really say for sure he can stay healthy, because all through the pre-draft process last year, he was dinged up. Came into the league, I thought, we were going to see him early, and then they kept holding him out. I do think he got banged up again in the middle of the season, if I'm not mistaken, too. But he does have the prototypical workhorse size, pass catching ability, run between the tackles, everything like that you want in a running back. And I will say he is one of the most frustrating running backs I've ever had to deal with, because I have never been able to get a share of Kendre Miller in any kind of draft, because I've wanted it. It's not like I'm not trying to. He's been a guy I've been targeting, and it just never works out.
Yeah, that'll happen sometime. Like I said, I had these two startups this past the past week.
Uh-oh.
You couldn't get him. Am I back?
Yep,
You're back.
I thought I froze.
Okay. Now, yeah, I got the little Mac pinwheel thing. I think Kendre, great value.
Yeah, I agree. Talking about our startups that AJ and I have been in, I got my first share of the guy that I'm going to talk about next, in Zamir White. I think that he is in line for a great 2024 season. In 4 games last year as a starter when Josh Jacobs was out, he averaged 15 points per game in PPR formats. I know that's a small sample size, but one of the first things that we need to look for as dynasty managers is, can this person even do it? Is it possible that they can have these good games? And he did it for 4 weeks in a row. So if he can do it for 4 weeks in a row, he can probably do pretty good over 17. And they brought in Alexander Madison, and that I could not care less about it. He is the definition of a doesn't matter running back. And so I think that Zamir White is going to get a ton of volume. I think that he's going to get a ton of opportunity. I don't know that team's going to be very good, but I don't think that it's going to matter very much because he's going to dominate that backfield. And for running backs, volume is one of the most important things. Volume can mask inefficiency. It can mask bad offense. For running back specifically, volume is one of the most important aspects. And I think that he's going to get that in spades. And where you can get him at, like I think I drafted him in like the 10th round of our startup. So it's a great value buy for a starting running back that's probably going to get 80% of the work. So that's somebody that I'm going to go out and pursue. Now, I will say that his value is on the rise, and I would expect that the closer we get to the regular season, once people stop worrying about, are they going to bring somebody in to split work and that kind of stuff, I would expect his price tag to jump quite a bit. So if you're wanting to get him on your roster, which I think is a good idea, I would say that in this particular situation, earlier is better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of agree. I do think I think you mentioned it, when Josh Jacobs was out, he kind of started to show that he could be the bell cow in Oakland or Las Vegas. Sorry. I did think there was a chance that they would probably address the running back position in this draft and grab another guy. They did Dylan Labe, and I think both of those guys kind of complement each other well. But I do think it's his backfield for the most part, other than like pass catching work. But
yeah, that's the one thing that I'm unsure about. But the thing, like, I don't know, because Madison doesn't catch passes either, and I don't know if they're just going to completely give over their full-time like third down role to Dylan Labe right away. I think he's good enough, but I don't know that they would do that. So I think he might catch more passes early in the season than you might expect. But yeah, he's a player I've been super torn with, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I liked him out of college, and then he did nothing for 2 years. And then now suddenly he's like a top 24 dynasty running back.
Well, I think one of the things is that that previous coaching staff with Oakland, they didn't want anybody to touch the ball except for Josh Jacobs.
Right.
Yeah.
They ran him into the
So
ground.
he never really had an opportunity for that first year plus that he was on the roster because Josh Jacobs got every carry. And so, but the moment that he got his opportunity to start, he ran with it, and he performed very well over those last 4 games. So often we see these backups come in when they get their opportunity and they're all right, or sometimes they're just bad. But Zamir White really took off with the opportunity that he was given. And obviously it was an impressive enough audition that they didn't feel like they needed to go spend any premium assets or spend any big money in free agency to address it.
Right. And I thought they would have too.
Yeah. All right, Mike. So what is your running back to have?
I think AJ had a quick thing real quick.
Just one quick stat in Zamir White's favor. Last year, Josh Jacobs was bottom 10 in the league in rushing yards over expected, which is an NFL Next Gen stats stat. And Zamir White was like top 10 to 15 in his limited sample size and was second in percentage of carries that were over expected yards, which is crazy to me. But yeah, so the analytics say that he did really well in the small sample size.
Yeah, you could tell that that offensive line was not very good.
Yeah.
And you could tell that over those, I watched because I had Josh Jacobs. And so I watched a lot of Josh Jacobs running into defensive linemen right after he grabbed the ball from the quarterback. Zamir White was a little shiftier, and you see that with younger running backs, which is why I always want the young stud running back. I don't care about the guy that's got 1,200 carries on his body, because that's what happens. They lose that short area quickness. That's typically one of the first things. Long speed and short area quickness leaves these guys so fast. And I think we saw a lot of that with Josh Jacobs. And when Zamir White got in there, he's got the fresh legs. He's got the young body. He doesn't have all this punishment on his legs. You saw that he was able to make some guys miss and get extra yards. So yeah, I think he's going to have a really good year.
This is a perfect segue into Mike's guy too. And now we're about Josh Jacobs.
Exactly. I was just about to say, you guys talked about Josh Jacobs a little bit. So that brings me to my guy, a guy that you're getting at the almost 2-3 turn in a lot of your rookie drafts, Marshawn Lloyd. And I think if there wasn't so much a premium on the wide receiver position, I think Lloyd would have been a higher draft pick in rookie drafts anyway. This is a guy who comes in and immediately takes that RB2 job from A.J. Dillon. I think A.J. Dillon is pretty – you could play the bagpipes for him at this point for his –
Toss him to the waiver wire.
Exactly. He's done. I think if you go back and look at Josh Jacobs, like you mentioned, he hasn't really played he played one full season. Most of the other seasons, he missed 2 games, 3 games, multiple games. He does have a tendency to get a little bit of banged up. So I do think Marshawn Lloyd could be the handcuff this year that we see break Josh Jacobs' fantasy value, to be honest with you. They do have an out in his contract. I forget exactly what it is for 2025. So he could be the running back of the future there, especially if he shows out. I do think Marshawn Lloyd is a better pass catcher than what we saw in college, because he wasn't really asked to do that. When I was down at the Senior Bowl, he showed that ability, showed solid hands, showed some decent route running, especially with angle routes. I was really impressed with that. So I could see him in almost the Aaron Jones type-ish role. And this is a team that historically uses multiple running backs. Like, we know Josh Jacobs has been like Josh Jacobs, yeah, but Aaron Jones is like a fantasy breaker for a lot of years. But, if you go back and look, it's usually like 55-45 split with him and A.J. Dillon. So A.J. Dillon was still seeing the field. I think we could still see the same thing with Marshawn Lloyd, and just a much better running back than A.J. Dillon ever was, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think that we're going to get to see Marshawn Lloyd as a starting running back this season. I would expect Josh Jacobs to miss at least a couple of games. Like I said, he's older. He's got a ton of carries.
He's been banged up his whole career.
He's been banged up a lot before.
Most importantly, he's a running back.
Yeah, he's at the point. He's a running back, and he's at the point in his career where, at minimum, you can expect these guys to miss at least a game or two with a tweaked hamstring, or they rolled their ankle or something like this. It's very unlikely that these older running backs ever make it through a 17-game schedule without missing some time. And that's nothing against Josh Jacobs. That's kind of what happens. It's pretty surprising when these bell cow running backs actually make it through a whole season without missing games. And so I think
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we're definitely going to get to see him get some starts in what is going to be a really good offense. And I think that that's going to be really telling on the future, because if he similar to what Zamir White did last year, if Josh Jacobs misses 2 or 3 games with a hamstring and Marshawn Lloyd comes in here and just dominates, they don't need to keep Josh Jacobs next year. They have a very clean break after this season. His deal is kind of a glorified 1-year deal with a lot of fluff. Like, they can get out of that deal no problem and roll with Marshawn Lloyd as RB1 if that's what they choose to do.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say, is that they do have that out for 2025. And this is a super young offense, and Josh Jacobs might be the oldest person on that offense. So if he doesn't produce or doesn't get the job done for them, they could definitely just bring in the young buck.
Yeah. And LaFleur has already said in press conferences how they do not want a bell cow running back. They want guys.
And that shows. That has shown for the past couple of years.
In Tennessee, when LaFleur was there, He gave Dion Lewis like 150 carries when Derrick Henry was on the same
That's
team.
insane.
Like,
I don't even know why you would do that.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you guys want to touch on there?
Nope.
Cool. Well, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to jump into our tight ends.
Are you looking for the latest and greatest in fantasy football insights? Well, look no further than toiletstotitles.com. Our website is your go-to destination for all things fantasy football, offering an endless stream of articles, rankings, and analysis to help you dominate your league. From weekly waiver wire targets to in-depth player profiles, we've got you covered with the insight you need to make informed decisions and stay ahead of the competition. So why wait? Head over to toiletstotitles.com today and take your fantasy game to the next level.
All right, guys. Well, we might as well just stick with the Green Bay offense since this is the Green Bay podcast, apparently. My tight end to have is Luke Musgrave. And it's going back to a lot of what we've already talked about when we've touched on this Green Bay offense in our other segments. It's an ascending offense. It's a young offense. It's an offense that is very good now and will probably be much better later, just based on the fact that these young guys are going to develop. And when it comes to tight ends, the key thing for me is athleticism. I want to target athletic tight ends. And Luke Musgrave had a 9.78 RAS score. He's very athletic. We saw him at the beginning of the year really starting to carve out a little role for himself. I think he was on pace for something like 700 receiving yards in his rookie season, which is very solid for a rookie tight end. I do know that, after he left with injury and Tucker Kraft came in, who was also a very athletic tight end. So if you can't get Musgrave, maybe go grab Kraft, who's probably even a little bit cheaper. Kraft had basically identical production to what Musgrave have, which tells me that if you're athletic enough and you can get open well enough and you can catch the ball well enough at the tight end position, Jordan Love is going to give you X amount of opportunity. Exactly. And that level of consistency is so important at the tight end position, where most of these guys are, unless you've got the top end elite tight end producers, you're riding a roller coaster every week on if you're getting one target or 10. So having a consistent asset that Jordan Love likes to hit his tight end about this much every week, you can kind of pencil it in. That is a great position to be in as far as the tight end position goes. And Musgrave, depending on how he develops, he could start to push towards maybe the bottom of that next tier that he's currently. I would say you've got your elite guys, Laporta and Kincaid. I would even put a couple of the guys that we're going to talk about later in that conversation. But and then there's a pretty clean break there, I think. And then you've got some of your upside guys like Jake Ferguson and Luke Musgrave. And I kind of lump those dudes together. And I think that Musgrave, with a little bit of development, and then that Green Bay offense just as a whole developing together and building rapport amongst each other, I could easily see Musgrave being a tight end one for many, many years.
Yeah. So I love Luke Musgrave. I did write an article about Luke Musgrave on the Toilets of Title website. So I'm all in on that with you as well. He was a comp for me to Dallas Goedert coming in the last year. If you go look at their RAS scores and their sizes, they're very eerily similar.
Clones of each other.
Yeah. So the thing with Musgrave is, if you look at his stats from last year, you mentioned 5 of the 11 games he played, he was a top 15 tight end in PPR scoring. So that's definitely something I think he could improve on. Health is definitely an issue with him, but it was a lacerated kidney last year, which is not something you could really put on anybody. That's car accident type injuries.
Yeah.
So
it's not like he's pulling a hammy every other week.
Yeah. So it's just it's one of those things that I don't think you have to really worry about that too much. But I love Musgrave, and I had him as my tight end 13 or 14, which, shout out to Twitter. They told me I don't know ball for having him in my top 14 Dynasty tight ends. That's a badge of honor I finally got. So, yeah, I'm right there with you with Luke Musgrave. I think he's a very solid buy. And I think him and Jaden Reed are the two guys that don't get enough love out of that Packers offense. There's a lot of Dontavian Wicks love out there. I mean, I would rather focus my time on those two guys in Reed and Musgrave.
Yeah. What do you think, AJ? Do you like
Yeah.
Musgrave?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all that. I was going to talk about him for this episode, but I saw you put
I
him
think
down.
all three of us were
To the
going
sheep
to.
first, baby.
I think all three of us. Hold on. I had him listed because I thought we were doing 3 and I took them off. We only did one.
Yeah.
No, he's
All right. Mike, who you got?
My guy's Evan Ingram.
Love that.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of like Dynasty rankings where he's like the 12th or 11th tight end in Dynasty. He's my tight end 9, which I mean is a little higher than consensus. He is only 29 years old, which I say only because tight ends could play till they're mid-30s, 34, 33. So he's got a couple years left. He did just get paid, I believe, in Jacksonville. So he's tied there for at least another, I believe it's 2 to 3 years, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he's got no guaranteed money left after this year, but his contract is very manageable as far as his cap hit goes. And so cutting him doesn't save them a ton of money either.
So he's pretty safe for
Yeah.
the most part. But my thing is that you mentioned the word tight end touchdown regression earlier in the episode. And usually that means a wide receiver, like I mentioned, Cortland Sutton had 10 touchdowns. We don't see that happening again. You don't really have to worry about that with Evan Ingram. He only had 4 last year and still ended up as tight end 2 because he was the most targeted tight end last year and the 7th the year before. So we have found who Trevor Lawrence loves the most, and that's Evan Ingram. And I think the hierarchy of that offense is Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk as the main targets. And I think we're going to continue seeing Evan Ingram being a top 7 or 8 fantasy scorer in the tight end position for the next few years, hopefully.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love Evan Ingram. He's on a ton of my teams. I think that if you're a contender, I would even go so far as to say maybe top 5 because he's going to be a major contributor for the Jags offense. Trevor Lawrence absolutely loves throwing him the ball. He's definitely got an opportunity to score more touchdowns this year. And I think his target volume is going to be about the same. So you could see him have an absolutely monster season this year. I don't worry about Brian Thomas Jr. Because they're going to operate very different parts of the field. And then Christian Kirk is fine, but that's really his only competition for targets. And as a tight end, if your only competition for targets is Christian Kirk, you're in a pretty good spot. So anything to add, AJ?
Yeah, no, I am probably a little lower than you guys on him. I like him like at cost as like tight end 11 or 12. I think that's fairly good value. My only thing with him is one with the touchdowns. He only had 4 last year. I don't know if that's going to go up. He has 24 touchdowns in his 7-year career. He's just never been a red zone threat at all. Like that's just not kind of how he's used, which is fine when you're catching 114 passes.
Yeah.
The other thing though is I do think like the first 7 or 8 weeks of the year he was good, like pretty good, but not really on that next level until Christian Kirk got hurt. Then he really started to put up big numbers. So I don't know if I see quite the same ceiling that he had last year, but I do think he's a solid, like middle of the pack tight end who, like, you know what you're going to get, and I don't think you can really go wrong taking him as tight end 11.
Sweet. So who do you got for your tight end, my guy?
I went with Pat Freiermuth. I've drafted him now in both of our startups, the silver and gold T2T leagues, mostly because I hate tight ends and I just get stuck at a certain point where I'm like, oh crap, I got to draft Pat Freiermuth, I guess. But I'm happy to do so because I think he is just generally very undervalued and underrated as a player. I think in year 2, he was 7th among tight ends in yards per route run. And then last year, he just dealt with a lot of injuries, and there was all kinds of nonsense with the Steelers' offense just being a mess, and he had a down year for sure. But in year two, as a second-year tight end, putting up numbers that good, like that's really impressive, and you don't see a lot of guys do that. And people, I think, have PTSD with tight ends and Arthur Smith.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Does Arthur Smith scare you at all?
I love Arthur Smith with Pat Freiermuth. Historically, tight ends kill it with Arthur Smith. The corpse of Jonnu Smith had like 600 yards last year.
Yeah, but at the expense of the tight end one on that team.
Right, but I think Pat Freiermuth fits the Jonnu Smith mold a lot closer than he does the Kyle Pitts mold. Like Kyle Pitts, the tight end isn't. I don't think that's an accurate word to describe Kyle Pitts. He's a wide receiver. He lines up in the slot 80% of the time. Freiermuth will be in line like Jonnu Smith was. Freiermuth's a good after the catch player. Like that's Jonnu Smith's whole game, and that's what Arthur Smith likes about him is he schemes things up, gets the ball in his hands, and he breaks tackles. Freiermuth does that really well. And if you go back to just like through Arthur Smith's career as a head coach and offensive coordinator, I mean, tight ends have just always produced. I mean, Jonnu Smith early in his career in Tennessee with Arthur Smith earned himself a $70 million contract with the Patriots
Sure.
under Arthur Smith.
Robbery.
Yeah, and I think Freiermuth's just a talented player who's kind of gotten lost because of injuries and that Steelers offense. And I think he's far and away the number 2 target in that offense right now.
Yeah. No, I can definitely agree with that. I liked Freiermuth. He was somebody that I was targeting a lot last offseason. And it didn't work out very well. So I do actually have a lot of Pat Freiermuth because I bought him a lot last year. So I'm hoping you're right.
I think when you have players like who are kind of trendy picks going into a season and they really do not live up to expectations, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes because that leaves such a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, that will bump someone down a little bit. And I kind of think that is happening a little bit with Freiermuth. Like I would take him over guys like somebody like Cole Kmet, who's going to be like maybe the 4th option in his offense. And I
totally agree with that.
I just don't think Cole Kmet's very good, to be honest. I would take him over like a Dalton Schultz, who will also be the 4th option in his offense. But yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. So we're going to take one more quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about our quarterbacks.
For those that aren't already aware, Rival Fantasy is the newest evolution in fantasy sports. Rival's all-in-one fantasy platform has changed the fantasy sports landscape. From fantasy bingo, where you mark off boxes of achievements that your players accomplish on the field, to season-long and best ball leagues, to mock drafts and challenges, and more. They have the perfect user-friendly website and app for you. So send a challenge to your friend or send a challenge to your rival and tell them to put their money where their mouth is. But your first deposit of up to $200 will be matched, plus an additional $25 just for using that link, joinrival.com/titletribe. That's joinrival.com/titletribe.
All right, guys. So let's jump into these quarterbacks here. We'll start with you, Mike. Who do you think is the quarterback to have in Dynasty football right now?
So I know a lot of rookie drafts have happened, but if you still have your rookie draft currently happening and you're sitting at the 110 or 111, 112 area, you're kind of a competing team, and you're looking at Bo Nix, you're thinking to yourself, wow, I could really get myself another quarterback to start. I would throw that to the person who has Will Levis and try to get Will Levis, because I think what the Titans are doing, getting everything put around Will Levis is very promising. I know last year Will Levis, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, a completion percentage of, I believe, just over 50% is not great. But the big thing about rookie quarterbacks, especially when they're kind of thrown into the role instead of getting the full first team reps and everything like that, because Ryan Tannehill was ultimately supposed to be the starter last year until he got hurt. Showed flashes that we really just can't deny. The game against Miami where they came back and won that game, his first game of the season with the 4 touchdowns. there's some flashes there. They addressed that putrid offensive line they had with was it Fagu? Who was their draft pick again? I can't remember off the top of my head right
They
now.
took J.C. Latham, I believe.
Oh, Latham.
Oh yeah, J.C.
Right.
Latham.
J.C. Latham.
They also signed a center in free agency.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then they bring in Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, who's a very, good safety net. Tony Pollard, I don't really think much of, but he's a good second piece.
You shut your mouth.
He's not better than Tajay Spears. Let's be real here. So I think they're putting all the pieces in place for Will Levis to be a solid starter, especially for fantasy football purposes. I think he could be a decent QB2. Like, I'm not predicting a QB1 breakout or anything like that. I could see him finishing in like the QB 18 spot, QB 20 spot in fantasy scoring, and that's solid. You know what I mean? Especially if you're a competing team, that'll help you win championships. Yeah.
One thing you definitely want to see when you're looking for a QB2, you're not going to get one of those elite guys. You want to see a commitment from the team that they're on. Because so often you get a Zach Wilson situation where team gives up on him and move on. Now he's worth nothing. And so the big commitment that the Titans made to Will Levis is very telling and should be paid attention to. They did a lot to try to improve that offense, giving him more weapons, and also improving that offensive line. He definitely has his very well pronounced issues, but man, he's got a monster arm. He's very competitive. I think he's going to be a good leader. And I think if he can clean up some of his accuracy issues, and maybe a better offensive line will help that. If he doesn't feel like he's got to run for his life on every play, I think you can get a really solid QB2 that's got a strong commitment from his team for a pretty good price.
Yeah, I think I got to look it up for sure, but I remember hearing that the Titans were like between him and Ryan Tannehill were the most sacked quarterbacks in football. Or
it was awful to watch.
Most.
I will say I think sacks are a little bit of a quarterback stat, just as much as they are an offensive line stat. But I agree with everything you said about the Titans, what the Titans are doing. I personally cannot bring myself to have Will Levis on my fantasy roster with how much I was not a fan of him coming out of college. But I think it's pretty likely that he's the starter unless this year is like a complete unmitigated disaster, which I don't think it will be just because of the improvements around him. Will probably be the starter for this year and next, with also the weakness of the quarterback class. Mm-hmm. So, and you don't have to pay all that much to get him. So I as much as I don't like Will Levis, I don't hate him as a dynasty buy.
They were the third most sacks given up, and they were only one behind the second most sacks given up. So that's pretty damn bad.
Yeah, and they weren't a very pass-heavy team. So their sack rate was probably number one.
Would you take Will Levis over Bo Nix?
100%.
I was talking to AJ.
Oh, sorry.
I know that you'll take him over Bo Nix because it was your idea. But sure. AJ, would you take Will Levis over Bo Nix?
I would not. I'm higher on Bo Nix than most. I'm lower on Levis, the player, than most. So
even considering the team situation. So I don't think the Tennessee Titans are going to set the world on fire, but I think they got a better offensive unit than the Broncos.
Yeah, I think there's a better chance the Broncos end up with like the 101 than the Titans do.
Yeah. I mean, redraft, I would certainly take Will Levis. But
do you just think that Bo Nix is a better quarterback?
I do. And I like Sean Payton as an offensive mind. So I like Russell. I really do believe that Russell Wilson was just straight up terrible last year, and he put up pretty good numbers. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nix put up decent numbers. But I like Bo Nix, so I would probably not do that. But I totally get it from if you're a contender and you need a second quarterback, I get that trade.
I did forget to mention Brian Callahan getting hired, and he's the former OC for the Bengals and worked with Joe Burrow, so it's possible.
I mean, that's another marriage. I'd consider that another commitment from the team is that they fired Vrabel, who is a very good coach, and brought in an offensive-minded head coach with the thought process of maybe this coach will be able to maximize Will Levis better than a defensive-minded coach like Vrabel can. So, all right, the last player that we're going to talk about is my quarterback that I'm buying in basically every league that he's for sale in, and that is Trey Lance.
Oh no,
he is
Here
so
we go again.
cheap. He's so cheap. People have. I'm not going to glaze Trey Lance and say he's the greatest quarterback ever and all of this stuff. But he was drafted highly for a reason. He does have tools. He does have ability. He does have ability that your average starting quarterback could only dream of having. Obviously, all of that raw talent needs to be refined. But how much progress has he made? We don't know because we haven't really seen him on the field. I will say that when I was talking earlier about the drum beat in training camp, well, we've been hearing the drum beat on Trey Lance from the Cowboys coaching staff since last season when they traded for him. He is somebody that they say is progressing very well. They speak very highly of. I'll also mention, I don't think this is going to happen, but Dak Prescott is currently on the last year of his deal.
I was going to ask you about that.
He's got a no trade clause and a no tag clause in his contract. So the Dallas Cowboys are basically going to have to write him a blank check or let him walk. And I think the success of the season is going to factor into that a little bit. If they get embarrassed again like they did last year, I can totally see it being possible that they decide, you know what, we need to try something different. And the starting point of that would likely be don't give a quarterback a monster extension. And so there is an opportunity that Trey Lance could move into the starting role for the Dallas Cowboys, which would be, I believe, a great situation for a quarterback because Dallas is going to have a great offensive line. You've got CeeDee Lamb. I think that Jake Ferguson is a more than serviceable tight end. They would need to get another receiver or two to fill that wide receiver 2 role. But I think it'd be a pretty decent situation for a young quarterback. I still believe in his talent. I think that he's still got a chance. I think that he's dirt cheap right now because everybody has basically given up on him. And so you can acquire him pretty cheaply. He's another guy that you a lot of times can get as a throw-in on a deal. And who knows, like if Trey Lance, let's say that the Dallas Cowboys decide Trey Lance is taking every snap during the preseason this year. They're not going to give a single snap to anybody else. So Trey Lance plays 3 full games during the preseason this year, and he looks phenomenal. His price tag is going to start climbing recklessly all over again.
Sure.
And you know, how many quarterbacks started a game last year? It was an astronomical number. I don't even remember, but it was crazy high.
50.
Yeah. What happened? You know, even if Dallas could re-sign Dak Prescott this offseason and you know, maybe during training camp they give him an extension, and that basically kills any possibility of Trey Lance being starting quarterback for the Cowboys, right? But let's say Trey Lance comes out during the preseason and crushes it and looks great. And you can totally tell that he has made great strides in his mechanics and all of these things, right? To go along with all of that natural talent that he has. Somebody's quarterback is going to get hurt. And I could totally see them calling Dallas and be like, hey, I'll give you a 3rd round pick for Trey Lance. And Dallas immediately takes that deal. And now all of a sudden, Trey Lance is a starting quarterback. And if he goes out there and he performs well, he's probably going to stay a starting quarterback for a very long time. And so I think right now is a great opportunity to buy Trey Lance because worst case scenario, you didn't pay very much and you kick him to the waiver wire later. Mm-hmm. But his price tag is low enough and he's still got, I think he's got one more shot. I think it's his last shot. I think that if he doesn't come out in this preseason and look really good, he's pretty much dead. But I think now is a great opportunity to hoard Trey Lance shares and then start selling them when he looks like a superstar in the preseason and people are getting hyped for him again.
Yeah. One thing I think you didn't, or I don't think you touched on is if he does get any chance to start, He's going to run for yards and touchdowns.
Yeah.
So even if he's not a great quarterback, like he'll put up fantasy points.
I mean, look at Justin Fields. He was not a very good thrower of the football for the most part, but his rushing upside made him a top 7 fantasy quarterback in ADP wise. Like it was ridiculous. Just because of how good he was running the ball. Trey Lance has that rushing ability. So if he does get an opportunity to start, he's going to be a good quarterback for your fantasy team, almost definitely.
For sure. And
all right, guys, anything to add?
Oh, hold on. I still got my quarterback to talk about.
Oh yeah, that's right, man. I'm so sorry. AJ,
He didn't like your choice. That's why he was.
You didn't write your quarterback down on the list, buddy.
Sorry. I have my own little page here. Don't worry. I don't like my pick for quarterback either. And so, but before you throw up all over yourself, let me explain. I'm going to go with Daniel Jones.
I'm out.
Do I think Daniel Jones is a good quarterback? No, I do not.
That's a great way to start.
Do I think he is probably better than Drew Lock, who is the backup? Yes. So I think he will start this year. And I also will say, if you're in a startup and you draft Daniel Jones in I don't even know what round he goes in, like the
14th,
12th, 13th, 14th round, grab Drew Lock in the 20th round because I think there is a non-zero chance that Drew Lock starts at some point this year. But
Daniel Jones insurance.
As long as Daniel Jones is starting, I mean, 2 years ago in his last full season, he finished as I think a QB1. He was like QB 12 or 11. He ran for 700 yards. He only threw for 15 touchdowns and was still a top, I think, 12 quarterback like that. And he has better weapons now than he did then, which isn't. I mean, he had nobody then. And now he's got Malik Neighbors, and the offensive line is probably a little bit better.
Malik Neighbors doesn't even know his name.
Yeah, I still very much believe in. Yeah, hopefully Malik Neighbors doesn't request a trade before week 1. I believe in Dable still. I think he's a phenomenal offensive mind.
That's a very good point too with Dable.
Yeah, I think if you just need a cheap QB3 for depth purposes. Or even say your team is loaded and you have Josh Allen, but you just don't have another starting quarterback, and you just need someone to fill that super flex role. You could probably get Daniel Jones for a third even from some people, or some kind of swap where you get a third and you give up a second or something like that. He's dirt cheap. His ADP is, he's being drafted after Justin Fields, who's not even a starting quarterback. And he has not quite the same, but similar rushing upside to Justin Fields. I don't think you can go wrong getting a guy for that cheap who has that kind of rushing ability.
My biggest fear with Daniel Jones is the fact that there is reports out there that the Giants were trying to make a play to move up in the draft to take. I would imagine it was Drake May, but I don't know for sure. That's my biggest fear with him. I don't know how safe he is after this year.
I'd be pretty surprised if he was the starter after this year.
Yeah.
This is very much a
make or break.
I was just going to say me saying that I'm in on Daniel Jones for Dynasty is very much if you're a contender,
okay, you
need a third quarterback for this year. He's so dirt cheap and he can put up pretty good numbers, I think, for fantasy. I don't think maybe he gets another year as a starter because the Giants draft someone and he sits, or just because of the contract or the quarterback class isn't very good or whatever. But this is more of a 1-year play, I think. But still,
I tend to disagree a little bit. I think that there's a good shot that he's the quarterback next year too. Simply because I don't like the quarterback class next year. I think the quarterback class next year is very weak. And I think that if Daniel Jones is at least okay, he will get another season.
Yeah, you very well may be right.
Is there a quarterback in next year's class that's better than Daniel Jones that you can confidently say is better than Daniel Jones?
I don't know, but
back maybe.
I wouldn't have said Jaden Daniels was much of a quarterback prospect going into last year either.
Yeah.
True.
I wouldn't have said much about Bo Nix as an NFL prospect going into last year. And they were both obviously top, like early high picks. I think also just because we don't think the quarterback class is very good, like I don't think that the quarterback class 2 years ago was very good, and the Steelers still took Kenny Pickett and had him start. So like teams,
it happens.
Yeah, like, and I just don't tell Giants fans that you think he might start next year because
you're just hoping that as a Cowboys fan that he's starting.
Give me
That's
all
the only
Daniel
reason.
Jones.
Yeah.
He's been my favorite player to watch over the past couple of years. Love me some Daniel Jones.
That week one game last year was one of the most ugly games I've ever.
I thought it was beautiful.
40-0.
Well, I thought it was beautiful. It made me really happy. I waited months for football, and then I got to see that opening weekend. It was a thing of beauty.
Yeah, that's a good feeling.
If only they could do that kind of stuff in the playoffs, then I'd really be happy. All right, guys, do you got anything else you want to touch on before we head out?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, so that wraps up our show for tonight. I really appreciate everybody watching. I hope you got some good information here. Let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of our decisions. You can always find us in the Gilded if you guys have follow-up questions or maybe want some insights on some players that we didn't touch on here today. Next week, we'll be back on. Are we doing Thursday or Wednesday next week, guys?
I think I would need to do Thursday.
Does that work for you, Mike?
I think so. I'll double check and I'll get back to you.
So we're going to plan for Thursday at 6 next week, guys. We're going to be doing a Make It or Break It episode where we're going to be talking about guys who absolutely need to produce this year or their fantasy value is going to be non-existent. Drink London. So, all right, guys, it's been a pleasure, and we will see you again next week.
See you guys.
See you.